In this video, I'm showing you the best way to get nice edges or seams on your non-stretchy fabric, otherwise known as woven fabric. Never worry about your sewing projects or cotton shirts falling apart at the seams ever again. Hey sewing friends, it's Megan from Sew and Tell Australia, and I'm excited to be sharing with you a masterclass I delivered in my exclusive membership, The Sewing Corner. In this masterclass, I shared 5 different methods for finishing your cotton fabric sewing projects, including a detailed look into French seams, pinking shears, how to bind your edges, zigzag stitch on the edges, and finally how to serge or overlock your edges, all with some detailed examples. I also show you the risk you take if you don't sew your seams properly, so you do not want to miss this video. Also, make sure you watch until the end, as I'll be sharing a bonus sewing tip with you to help you on all your sewing adventures. So let's jump into the masterclass now. In this month's So Tell Me About It, I'm going to teach you 5 ways to finish off your woven seams. Woven fabrics, unlike knit fabrics, can fray very easily. So if you don't finish off your seams, it's very easy to compromise the internal strength of the garment, and basically seams can fall apart. So here's an example of a shirt that I made out of a rayon fabric. I love it. I love this shirt. However, I can no longer wear it. I was in a rush to finish it, and unfortunately, my seams have frayed away and I can no longer wear this shirt. If you look closely, I can show you exactly sort of where it has frayed. The threads have basically frayed all the way back to the stitching line, and in some places actually frayed away from the stitching line. So as you can see, unfortunately I now have holes. Whereas if you look where I've overlocked the garment, in these areas, these seams have held strong, and if I had have overlocked the entire garment, I would definitely still be able to wear it. So it's a shame. I'm going to have to make another one because I love this top, and it's kind of a little bit beyond repair in some parts, so I'm going to have to just make a brand new one. But it's, as you can see from this, it's really important to make sure that you finish off your woven seams. So the first one we're going to do is the one that we did in our tutorial this month, which is the French seams. And French seams are a really beautiful and practical way to finish off the insides of your woven garments. So essentially, the French seam encloses the seam allowance inside the garment so that no raw edge is visible. It's most commonly used on sheer fabrics where you don't want to see a seam edge at all, because then it blends in with the rest of the garment. But you can use it on everyday fabrics as well, like we did in our kinjarling dress. But I'm going to demonstrate how to do French seams on just some plain fabric as well. So let's take a look. To get started with our French seams, what we need to do is basically do the opposite of what you would do when you're sewing a garment not with French seams. So you need to place your garment with wrong sides together or right sides out as shown. And what we're going to do is just sew a straight line all the way down the edge of the fabric. It's important to note when using French seams that you do need to have a decent amount of seam allowance. So I'm going to do probably about a half an inch seam allowance, and I'll show you why when we finish. So I'm just going to sew straight down. Now that we've sewn our straight edge or straight line down the side, what we're going to do is trim back our seam allowance to probably maybe 2 to 3 mil. Oh, it's probably closer to 5 mil actually. But as you can see, I've trimmed that back now. Now what we're going to do is turn our fabrics like we would normally do, which is right sides together and wrong sides out. So what you now need to do as well is you need to press this. So I'm going to take that over to my iron and give that a really good press along there. And then we're going to sew down here again. So I'll take this over to my iron. So I've given this a really good press, putting my right sides together, my wrong sides out. And now I'm going to sew probably about 1/4 inch down here, and you'll see how this seam gets enclosed. And now we have our enclosed seam. So as you can see from the front, it looks fine, looks like a normal garment, and on the inside, our seam is all enclosed. So this is obviously quite an exaggerated French seam. You would usually have it a little bit smaller, but just to show you what it looks like, that is our French seam all done. The next way you can finish your seams is with pinking shears. Pinking shears have this sawtooth blade pattern, which is great for using on woven fabrics. Now, pinking shears do not prevent fraying, however they do reduce the length of the threads, minimizing the damage. Now, how pinking shears work is they actually cut the fabric on the bias. So all you need to do is cut along the lengthways or cross grain of your fabric in a straight line, and the small triangles of the pinking shears will be cut on the bias, reducing the fraying of your fabric. Now, a note to make is that if you are cutting on the bias or a diagonal or curved edge, your triangles will then be cut on the straight grain, which means the fabric will likely fray. So what I'm going to do now is sew an example to show you how pinking shears work. I'm starting again with 2 woven pieces of fabric. This time I'm going to sew them right sides together, and I'm going to sew all the way down this edge. Again, I'm going to use an exaggerated seam line or seam length just to really get you to understand how the pinking shears work. So as you can see, I've sewn a line down here. So now I'm going to take the pinking shears and just cut off the edges. So as you can see with our sawtooth pattern, cut them off and you'll see what happens. So I've cut away a section. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to press that open, and you'll see in a minute what I mean. So I've pressed that seam open now. We've got our pinking sheared edges, which are just going to sit nice and flat. So like I said, it doesn't actually prevent the fraying, but it does limit the length of the frayed thread and minimizes the damage. Now, the way I use most is to overlock or serge the edges. You can do this 2 ways. There's either a 3-thread overlock or a 4-thread overlock. Now, the proper way to do this and how you should do it is you should actually stitch your garment first. So you would take your garment, stitch along with your normal sewing machine, and then what you would get would be your overlock, and you'd have a 3-thread overlock, and you would use that to tidy up the seams on the edges. So you're overcasting or overlocking the edges. Now, a 3-thread overlock is not meant to be used for garments that are going to have a lot of wear and tear on them. So things like pants in the crotch area or sleeves on shirts, because they have a lot of movement, you want extra strength, whereas a 3-thread overlock is not going to do that if you're using it purely to put the garment together. So you definitely want to make sure you've got that 4th stitch from your machine if you're using a 3-thread overlocker, to make sure you've got a really good solid seam. Most people use a 4-thread overlocker, which is what I do, because it's got that extra row of stitching. So it's got the 2 top threads and then the 2 lower looper stitches, and that's what most people use if they use an overlocker to sew their woven garments with. It's what I do, and it just gives you that extra security, that extra stitch of security. If you want to be really, really pedantic and make sure you're doing it right, you can do it. You can actually sew it on your machine and then do a 4-thread overlock, so you've kind of got like three threads of strength. Nothing's going to fray that one, but you can just sew your normal woven garments on an overlocker on a 4-thread, which is what I tend to do. But if you're going to be using a 3-thread overlocker, you should definitely be putting in that 4th stitch for safety. So let's take a look at how we use our 4-thread overlocker to secure those seams. I've got my 2 pieces of fabric here, so now what I'm going to do is sew along here. What I like to do is just take a tiny bit of the fabric off at the same time. So with the overlocker, it has a tiny little cutting blade, and what it does is it just helps neaten it up. So I'm just going to put it straight through, and we'll see how quick and easy finishing off woven seams is on an overlocker. That's it. That is my seam all finished. As you can see, it is beautiful. It is definitely my preferred way to finish off woven garments. It just has such a nice finish to it. I mean, you can't always use your overlocker to make woven garments. There are times when you need to use a sewing machine. For example, zips are one that, you know, you really need to use your machine for, but you can go along after and just finish off those seams. And from the front, nice and secure. So one of the things that can be sort of an issue, I guess, with overlockers is that you can get these stitches showing through. But there are a couple of ways to fix this. You can change out your left needle to the same colour that you're working with your garment. So for this one, I would probably have changed it to a navy blue. You can play with your stitch length to make that a little bit tighter and, you know, your thread tension and things. But in general, using an overlocker to finish off your woven seams is a winner in my books. When finishing off the seams of bags, it's common to use double fold bias binding. You can also use double fold bias binding on the seams of garments. You can get double fold bias binding from most good sewing and haberdashery stores. So I'm going to show you how to use double fold bias tape on an already finished seam. So for this one, I have already sewn up my seam. So as you can see, it's like this on the front. And now what I'm going to do is get my double fold bias tape, which this is what it looks like. And the quickest way, the easiest way, is you open it up and you basically just slot it over the top like that. And what happens is it encloses the seam. So you've got to make sure you stay within your stitch line, obviously. And I'm just going to get some pins. Pin it along here. And then I go all the way down my seam, pinning it as I go, and then what I'm going to do is stitch along here. So I'll pin it all the way down and then we'll stitch it. So I've pinned my bias tape all the way down. Now I'm going to stitch down here and we'll see how it's going to stay all nice and closed. So I've stitched that all the way down there. As you can see, it's caught along the back as well. So now when we open it up, we've got our beautiful seam at the front, as in our two pieces of fabric joined together. And on the back, we have a beautiful enclosed seam. So as I mentioned, this is more common in bag making, but you can do it in garment sewing as well. Now the last way I'm going to demonstrate is just using your normal machine, and it's using a good old Zig Zag Stitch. So there are other stitches on some of the more modern machines that are computerized. They have like a faux overlock stitch, but if you just have a normal machine that doesn't have any fancy stitches, you can just use a normal run-of-the-mill Zig Zag Stitch. So what that does is, if you just use that after you've done your stitch line, it gives it that extra strength and does a bit of a faux overlock, as I said, overlock or overcast stitch, which can help prevent fraying. So let's take a look at this last way. To start with, I'm going to sew down my edge again. Now I'm going to make a slightly longer sort of seam allowance, as I have been, just to kind of really exaggerate what we're doing. So I've done my long stitch length here, and now all I'm going to do is set my machine to zigzag. And I'm going to do maybe a 3 stitch length and 4 width. And what I'm now going to do is just zigzag stitch in the seam allowance, so it won't be on the garment side. And what that's going to do is help prevent the fraying. So there you have it. As you can see, I've zigzagged all along there. You can trim it back to sort of the edge of the zigzag line just to help keep it a little bit neater, making sure you don't snip the stitch. But once you've got that, that is your seam all finished. I hope you found that helpful and that you will promise me you won't ever leave your seams and edges raw or unfinished from now on. My bonus tip today is to make sure you get some good quality tailor's chalk when you're cutting out your patterns. I like to use either just a nice little block of chalk, or you can get a Chaco wheel. It's really important to mark all your notches, and you don't want them to rub off while you are moving the pieces around. So another tip is to also mark them in the seam allowances, because it's a great way to make sure you don't end up with any marks on your actual garment or project. I'll make sure I link to these in my description if you want to pick up some of these nice pens. You can also find out more about my membership, The Sewing Corner, and how to join by clicking the link in the description below or following the link on screen. The Sewing Corner is a thriving community of like-minded sewers just like you who encourage and support each other to achieve your sewing goals. Every month we share knowledge, swap pattern ideas, and inspire each other to learn more. So don't sew alone, come and join us in the Sewing Corner today. Check out the link below. To help you further in your sewing adventures and projects, I've also linked a couple of videos on screen, and I have a bunch of other resources linked in the description below, so don't forget to check those out.